Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the pre-recorded Blender tutorial for Class 5. So today I'm going to be showing you a bunch of techniques, some of which we've covered a little bit in our previous classes, some of which will be a little bit new. And what I'm going to do is just go through how I make this little animation here. A lot of this, as I said before, we've already done before. Let me just turn on my transparent, my background. Hold on, so we can see that cool Vertigo effect again. Yeah, what I'm going to be showing you is how to make this animation. And the reason I'm doing it this way instead of using the building is that I don't want you to copy the animation that I'm making. This is really just to bring together a bunch of techniques that we have discussed in class, and it's meant to help you remember what sort of things you can do to finish exercise number 2. Now, if you're not aware, we've actually been following the exercises in the syllabus, and I've highlighted sort of where we're up to now. So if you remember, the first exercise was very simple. I just wanted you to import some 3D models, make some basic animations, and export the animation into a frame sequence. Okay, so that everybody should have done by now. What we've been doing with exercise 2 is we've done procedural polygon modeling. We've made that one part of a building. And we've sort of turned it into an environment with basic materials, lighting, cameras, and so on. If you look down here where it says outputs, that's the things that I want you to hand in. And when I say hand in, I want them on your website. So as I said in class, this week 5, week 6, week 8, this is a guide. You know, all of this is not actually graded until the end, but I think these should be pretty good checkpoints for you, just to, if you want to know whether you're keeping up. If you stick to this timeline, you should be absolutely fine. And some of you might get it done quicker. But okay, so what I want you to do now that you've got your modeled building with the textures and the modifiers to make as many buildings as you want, I want you to make at least one nice rendered image with a transparent background so you can use it with videos for Daniel's class. And I also want you can make ones with the background as well. Make as many kind of cool images as you want and select the best ones to share with us in class. And then I want you to make 15 seconds of rendered animation with a transparent background again, so you can use it for compositing with Daniel's class, you know, make something interesting. And then another 10 seconds with or without a background, and we're going to use a different type of camera perspective. Now, in an upcoming lecture, I talk a lot more about isometric and axonometric space, but I'm also going to just show you very simply how we can do that in Blender and how we can change the type of perspective on the Blender camera to get some really interesting effects and quite different moods. Okay, so I'll go back into Blender now. And so yeah, the reason I'm doing it with the monkey is that you know, if I did it with the buildings, there'd be a temptation for you to just step-by-step copy what I do. And to me, that's kind of pointless. Like, the whole point of this course is for you to learn some of these techniques, but also principles of how you can work, and then apply it to your own work in unexpected ways that might achieve your own desired outcomes, things that you want to try to represent or ideas that you want to explore. So I'm doing it with the monkeys here just so there's no confusion and so you don't feel that you have to do exactly what I do. So what's important here is, as I said before, the techniques rather than copying this exact video. But okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll through this animation again and show you some of the things that I've done, because some of these tools will be helpful for you. So at the beginning, if I zoom in on my timeline here, and if you don't see the timeline, I'm just in animation mode. And animation mode should always have the timeline down the bottom. If you're in modeling mode, you might not see the timeline, but animation mode click. Sorry, just let my graphics card catch up. Okay, animation mode, it should all be there. So, when I'm zooming around on the timeline, I'm just using my scroll wheel, and if I want to move side to side, I just click that scroll wheel. Okay, so the first thing I've got going on here is I've been a good boy and I've kept my outliner nice and tidy. And what are we looking for here? I've got my perspective camera group, and in that group I've got this camera that I've animated here. So the first thing I've done, I think we discussed in class, is I've made the vertigo effect. So what's happening here is that where it looks like we're kind of, the whole background is warping, but actually the background is not changing at all. I'm just changing two things on the camera. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. So I do like a vertigo effect thing here, just because it, it looks kind of cool. And then if you see this point here where the camera's not moving, you can see these lights are flashing on and off. And what I've done is I've used the same emission texture that we used to make the light last week, but I've animated it. So the emission, instead of being set at a fixed point, is going up and down. And I'll show you how to do that. Then, if I scroll forwards, the camera, let's just have a look at what the camera's doing. I'll just close these windows up a little bit. So the camera, which is here, is orbiting around sort of this central group of monkeys here. And the way that it's doing this, we discussed a little bit, I think 2 weeks ago, is the camera is parented, I'll open that up here, it's parented to an object here, which is called an empty. And so that means that if I grab the camera, can I grab the camera? Why can't I grab the camera? Okay, for some reason, okay, if I grab the camera and I just move it, you'll see that it always points to that same central area. And I'll show you how to set that up once again, because that's really convenient for when we're animating. It makes the camera a lot easier to control. And what else have I got? I just kind of then do a close-up, and you can see that much like last week, we've got this depth of field here. So the camera is focused on the red monkey, and the blue and the green monkey, and all the monkeys in the background are out of focus. And the way I did that is I made this hidden object here called camera focus. I'll just highlight that. So the camera is focused on this cube here, but I've hidden the cube. I've turned off its rendering, and I've also hidden it from the viewport. But it's just a convenient way for me to have a lot of control over where the camera is focused. And I'll show you what I mean. I can change that if I go into my camera and go into the camera settings. Let's wait for my overlays to disappear. If I look at the aperture, the f-stop, that's what's going to control how much of my scene can be in focus and how much will not be in focus. It's simulating what happens in, actually I've got in a camera lens. So in the camera lens, there's a hole in the lens, and the size of that hole does two things. It controls how much light the camera lets in, but also how many things can be in focus or out of focus. And, you know, because sometimes we use computer graphics to make things that look like something that comes out of a camera, we have these controls here to sort of copy it. And if I drag the f-stop up and down, you'll see that f-stop, if you don't know how f-stop works, the larger the number, the smaller the hole on a real camera. And so the principle is the same here. If I make this number larger, you'll see the scene getting a little bit darker, but everything else gets more and more focused. Whereas if I make this number really, really small, we have like overexposed lights, which, you know, actually you could make some interesting effects with, but almost nothing is in focus. We have a tiny bit of focus here, and everything else is out of focus. So I think I had this set at something like 2.2. It's kind of got that nice, slight nighttime feel to it. Okay, the other thing I've done is I've made a very simple color harmony with the monkeys, and I did that using the Adobe Color website. So I'll show you that as well. Okay, so let's get started. Let's remake some of this. So perhaps unsurprisingly, my monkeys are using arrays. And if I turn those off, we'll see that there's actually just one monkey group here the whole time. So I'll hide that whole group, and I made this exactly the same way that that I made the apartment building. You know, I have a group with lots of different stuff in it, all my little light bulbs and my cord and my three monkeys, and then I grouped it all together and turned it into one single object, which then I put the array on. All right, so let's go back to probably something simple where, and I'll get rid of all these bulbs. My poor bulbs are going to have to make you all again. All right, okay, get rid of this. Okay, so before, when I made the previous tutorial, we had something like this. We had one monkey, and it had this red material here, this orange material, and we made it shiny. We turned it to metallic 1, and I set the roughness at 0.1. And that gave that sort of shiny red balloon look to it. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate and make 2 more monkeys. We've got the, I guess, like the 3-wise monkey look going on here. Now, if I go into look development mode here, material preview, you'll see that they're all the same color. I might hide my radiance volume. Okay, see, they're all the same color. So one thing to do, and the reason I'm doing this is when you're thinking about color, you might be adding in other elements of your own, or you might be thinking of lights. Maybe you could make interesting color schemes with lights. So when you're changing the colors yourself, there's all sorts of things you can do. Now, the first thing is if we go into the material properties here and I click on the base color, we can look at this color in a number of ways. The first is on the color wheel. We can see that the color is down here in the orange area before the red and before the pink. If I look at RGB, it'll tell us the RGB and alpha values. HSVA, it'll tell us HSV and alpha. But if I go into hex, we get this very convenient code, and this code is called a hex code. And the great thing about hex codes is that they're transferable. Excuse me. So where I'm going to go is this handy website, color.adobe.com. And this website, it's really just automatically generating some basic principles in color theory, but with the fantastic convenience that it gives you a hex code and RGB values for any color you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my hex value that I copied from Blender here. And if I do that, at the moment, the color harmony rule is set to analogous. And analogous, like the word analogy, is things that are close to one another. So here we have this color scheme of colors that are all spaced in a harmonious way around this orange color. I can change it to monochromatic, but I've lost my orange. Okay, hold on. Okay, if I change it to monochromatic, basically that's giving us any color that's on the same, what we call radii, like a point from the center of the circle out to the circumference, and any color on the same radii, if I move this around, are what's called monochromatic. They're the same chroma, but they have different saturations and light and dark values. Okay, I'll just get my orange back here again. We can do a triad. If we do a triad, that means we have 3 equidistant points on the color wheel. We can do a complementary, and complementary is meant to be sort of a very striking scheme where we look to colors that are the complement, which means they're on the direct opposite of the wheel. We can go split complementary, and so on and so on. So, look, let's go. I think I had Triad before, so we can do Triad. It's kind of like it'll look a little bit like a primary colors sort of separation, but it looks kind of pretty. So I'll just put my orange, I think, is that my orange there? Is that the same value? Not quite. Okay, so my orange is there, so then these colors should work quite nicely. So I'm going to grab the green, I'm going to copy it, and now on one of my new monkeys, I'm going to go into the material and I'm going to remove the monkey material, make a new material, and I'll call it monkey green. And now I'll just go into the base color and I'll just paste the green. And then I'm going to have to, I'll keep the same metallic look. So I'll put the metallic up to 1 and the roughness down to 0.1. Okay, so now we've got the red and the green, and I'll grab this bright blue. And maybe, yeah, bright blue is fine. It'll be a very bright, happy color scheme. So same again, I'll get rid of the old material, make a new one, I'll call it monkey blue. Whoop, can I get that back? Monkey blue. And the base color, I'll paste in that blue, hit enter, and then I'll put the metallic at 1 and the roughness at 0.1. Okay, cool. So now we've got 3 monkeys that are all bright and shiny. So, and of course, you know, we could keyframe this color. You know, if I wanted this to change over time, I'd start at the beginning of my sequence, and I could press I and insert a keyframe here, and then I could go say to frame, I don't know, 50, and I could change it to another color and press I again, and that means that you can see that blue monkey is now changing color over time. But I'm not going to keep that, so I'm going to right click and clear the keyframes and just go back to that nice blue color I had before. Okay, so now I'm going to make those Christmas light things that I had around here before flashing. And I'm not telling you that you should put Christmas lights on your monkeys or on your buildings, but the way that I'm going to make them will have a few extra tricks that might be useful for things you want to do. So first I'm going to make the cable that wraps around the monkeys. So I'm going to go Shift A, and instead of adding a mesh, you know, I could make a cylinder and try to bend the cylinder, but there's a much easier way to do it. I'm going to add a curve that's going to be a Bezier curve. Add that. I might just go into solid mode so I can see what I'm doing. Now my curve has gone in there. It's gone a pretty annoying place, but I'll just grab it on the Z-axis, bring it down, and kind of put it closer to where the monkeys are going to go. Let's go into wireframe mode, make sure it's, because I want to stay in this central area up the top. So maybe I'll stay on transparent and I'll just scale it down a bit. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and we've got these handles here, and these are control points on the curve. A curve is different to a mesh. A mesh is like, you know, vertexes, lines, and faces. A curve is, it's a curve, it's a mathematical curve. It doesn't really have a resolution or a number of polygons. It's, if I grab one of these points, you'll see that it's a mathematical curve. And so to do certain objects, it's a lot easier to start with a curve. Okay, so I'm just going to grab one endpoint on the curve and press E for extrude. And look at that, we've got more curve. And I can rotate that. Excuse me. Sorry, there was a bug on my foot. Rotate that, and yeah, what am I going to do? Maybe I want to make this, yeah, I'm going to scale these handles down a bit. Then I'll grab the middle control point again. And I'm just going to move these points around until I've kind of got a cable that's doing something I want. I'm going to press extrude again. grab that over here, maybe rotate it a bit, grab the end one again, extrude, extrude again, and I'm just making sort of like a cable shape. I'm going to rotate that because I want it to be a little bit messy. That'll do. Okay, so now if I press tab, okay, I've got a great cable. It's still way too high, so I'll just go into side view and I'll grab it, bring it down. But to give it a little bit more shape, I'm going to bring a few points up. So I'm going to grab this on the x-axis, because you know cables often don't sit perfectly flat, do they? They have little kinks in them. Okay, so there's our curve. Now, you're thinking, okay, cool, that's a really thin line, but if we want like a power cable, it obviously needs some thickness. So if I go into the curve tab here, we can go down to Bevel. And what Bevel will do is it'll give thickness to our curve. And if I just grab this and slide it up and down, you can see that it's automatically generating some thickness here. Now I want this to be like an electrical cable, so I'm going to have it at 0.02. That looks pretty good to me. I can live with that. Yeah, why not? And I don't think I really need to change anything else here. I think it's okay. Now, do I want to change anything else? No, I think that'll do us for now. All right, so there's two things I want to do. First, I'm going to convert this. At the moment, this is still a curve. It's not a mesh, and I want to just convert it into a mesh now because I'm done sort of moving it around. If you want to still do more work on it, you can leave it as a curve as longer, because when it's still a curve, you can use the control points to move it around, and that can make life a lot easier. But because I'm going to join it to these things later, I'm going to turn it into a mesh now. So to turn it into a mesh, I just right click and convert to mesh. So now if I press tab, you'll see that it's a mesh. It doesn't have those control points anymore. It's got faces, vertices, and edges. Okay, so I'm going to give that a material, because if I go into my render preview mode, it's, I don't know, I think a cable should probably be black, because most electricity cables are. So I'll give it a new material. I'll call it black cable. I will set its color to almost black, maybe a little bit lighter, and I'll leave metallic at 0, and I'm just going to put roughness down to 0.25. So it's a little bit shiny. That'll do. Okay. Now I'm going to add those reflecting, or the little lights. So, okay, so here's an interesting mistake I've made. My monkey is clipping through my cable. In the real world, things don't pass through one another, and because I've already converted it to a mesh, I probably should have left it as a curve for longer, but I'm just going to move my monkey. Keep it simple. All right, that'll do. That's probably okay. All right, and then with this one, we've kind of got the same problem, so I'll move this one a little bit that way. And then who's going to know? Cool. All right. So now I'm going to make these flashing lights, and if you think about it, the flashing lights could be useful. For example, if your building has flashing signs on it or something like that, flashing lights can be handy to be able to make. Now we could add a bunch of point lights and make them all, hold on, it's adding to my 3D cursor. If I could add a bunch of point lights here and make them all sort of glow and flash, but I think what's a little bit visually more appealing is I'm going to add a cylinder like this, and I'm going to just treat the cylinder like it's a little light globe, and I'm going to make it flash. So I'm just kind of scaling it, but you don't need to make these cylinders because you're not making my Christmas lights, but just in the general principle. So there's one cylinder, and I'm going to call it Green Christmas Light. And green Christmas light, and I'm going to make one more, and I'm just going to duplicate the green one, Shift D, I'll put it here, and maybe I'll just rotate this one a little bit on the x-axis like that, and just put it back over so it's kind of still sticking out of the cable like that, and that will be blue Christmas light, right? Okay, so the next step is I'm going to add a material, and if you remember from last week, we have that very handy material that instead of the principled BSDF, we have the emission shader. And I'm going to use some of the same colors, I think, from Adobe. So I'll just use the green and copy that in. Whoop. Copy that into the color channel, and I'll make it emit 3. Okay, cool. So my emission's working. And if your emission is not glowing like that, just make sure that you've got a bloom ticked here. Bloom is what gives you that kind of extra glow. All right, so there's my green, and we'll set up the blue. Same thing again. I'll add an emission shader here, and I'll grab the blue hex code and I'll copy it into the color channel. Oops, I have to delete that. Okay, there's my blue, and I'll make the strength of the emission also 3. Okay, cool. So now we've got these, like, maybe it should be brighter. That for the blue it looks kind of dark. Yeah, that maybe even 6. That looks a bit better. Maybe I'll make this one higher too, because the green is a bit brighter, so you know the same emission value doesn't look as good on the blue. All right, so I've made them a bit brighter than they were before. Okay, so now we want to make them flash on and off, and there are some tricks that I want to show you. All right, so if I grab the green light, I'm going to add a keyframe on its emission strength. So I just press the letter I to insert a keyframe. Simple as that. Now I'm going to make it blink every half second. Now we're usually working at 30 frames per second, so I'm going to go to frame 15 on my timeline, and I'm going to set the strength here to 0. 0 looks weird. 0.1, something like that, yeah. And even that looks a bit strange. 0.4. Okay, what I probably should do is maybe even like change the saturation or something about that. Doesn't look like a turned off light, but I just want to show you the principle, so that'll be okay for now. So I've set the strength to 0.1 on frame 15, and I'm going to insert a keyframe, and then I'm going to go to frame 30 and put the emission back up to 5 and press I again. So if you look on the timeline down here, you can see that there is this this U shape, and if you don't see this, this is because I'm on what's called the graph editor. Sometimes by default you might be on the node editor, or the dope sheet, sorry. You might see this normally, just dots. The dots are showing you where the keyframes are, and the dope sheet, the usefulness of the dope sheet is for moving keyframes, moving them in time. Whereas if I go to the graph editor, the graph editor is showing me what my keyframe is doing. It's showing me these lights, this curve here. If I click here, this curve is the brightness going up and down. And so what I can do is, on the graph editor, I can turn this curve into an infinite loop, so it'll just blink forever. So if I select these 3 keyframes that start and finish at the same point, and I press, I think it's Shift E, and I can make cyclic. And look at that. So now we've got this wave that goes forever, and if I press spacebar to play, my light's blinking. Look at that. Happy days. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing with my blue one, but I'm going to make it kind of the opposite. So instead of starting at 6 and going 6 to 0 back to 6, I'll go the other way. I'll start at 0 and I'll put in a keyframe. Or maybe I'll start at 0.1 and put in a keyframe. And then I'll go to frame 15, make this 6, add a keyframe by pressing I, and then I'll go to frame 30 and turn this back to 0.1 and put in a keyframe by pressing I. So now again, we've got this symmetrical looking curve, and I'll select all three and I'll press Shift E and say make cyclic. So now, if I press play, we've got these two lights sort of flashing on and off, like Christmas lights or fairy lights or whatever you'd call them. All right, so now that I've done two of these, I can just duplicate them around. There are more. If you had to duplicate a lot of them, we could use an array modifier and duplicate them around the curve. But for now, just because I'm doing this quickly, I'm just going to Shift D and randomly sort of place my lights on my power cable. And you know this, I don't have to do that many, so it's not too bad. I'm just pressing Shift D and then left clicking. And the good thing about doing it this way is that they will all have the same animations on them. So I'll do the same thing, Shift D, and I might rotate these ones a little bit, just so they don't look exactly the same. And just make sure they're still on the cable, Shift D, rotate. And this is why it's easier working from top-down mode to do something like this, because we're not really changing that much height. When our cable is moving up and down, maybe some of our lights might be in the wrong position, so I'll have to check that. But you know, the main purpose of this is to show you how to make these flashing lights. The fact that I'm making Christmas lights is probably a little besides the point. Okay, and pop one in there, and there, and there, that'll do. All right, so now, yeah, a bunch of these, the height's terrible, so I'll just grab this on the x-axis, grab it on the x-axis, put it somewhere a bit more logical. Yeah, these are all too low, it's okay. So I'm just, you know, this is not super great 3D modeling because it looks a bit weird. There's no light fitting or anything, but, you know, it's just a demonstration for you. Okay, yeah, look, that'll do for now. Okay, so now if I press play, well, hey, look at that, flashing lights. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this all into one object and make an array. So I've got a whole nice group of these monkeys. So what we've got so far is me doing something stupid. Okay, I put all of the blue Christmas lights in the wrong group, but that's okay. I want to put them all in a group that's going to be called Monkey Box Master. Because that's where my Suzannes are. I left some modifiers on the Suzannes. I'm just going to apply those. Those were the subdivision surface modifiers. But I've got to put all my lights back in the right group. So that means my Bezier curve and my Christmas lights, I need to move those M into the Monkey Box Master, and then my green lights. So I'm just pressing B to drag select, or to box select here, B for box, M and Monkey Box Master. So now, if I hide Monkey Box Master, good. All right, much better. And I keep clicking on my irradiance volume. Okay, maybe I'll delete that because I'll come back to this. All right, so first of all, now that I've got the Monkey Box Master, I'm going to duplicate this collection. We know this step, hide the original, and then everything in here, I'm going to join together. So I'll just go B for box select, grab it, Shift B for, can I do that? B for box and Shift select, is that going to work? No, that's not going to work. All right, Shift select, that works fine. And can I just join this? Control J, yes I can. All right, so there is my, let's call this monkey box joint. Okay, and now the happy thing is, it should have still kept all of my animations. Yeah, that's nice, that's great. Because we've still got separate materials and everything like we did last time, so that's cool. All right, so now we still, before I apply the arrays, have to do the same general things as we did to the building. So I'll click on the group, Shift A, no, sorry, Control A, and I'm just going to, maybe I want to make sure it's in the middle of the scene. I'm going to put its location to 0. No, that's not great. All right, I'll do a few things. I'm going to go Control A, Scale, Rotation. I'm just applying the rotation of the scale, and I'm going to say Object Transform. No, set origin to geometry. And that's what that's done, is it's told Blender that the middle of this object should be the middle. If I go here, it should be the middle of this whole group now. And so therefore, if I press delete now, it's in the center. I still have to move it up a bit though. GZ. Okay, that's cool. Now I'm going to apply all the transforms again. So now that is the 0 point of this group. So let's just, I'm going to do some really simple arrays this time. I'll just do 2. So we're going to have a few going this way. Let's make it, I don't know, 6. And then I'll do a second array going, instead of on the x-axis, going on the y-axis, 1.1, and I'll also put the count up to 6. Okay, so now we've got this like grid of monkeys, and I'm just going to move it so that it's in the center of my scene. Something like that. I'm just going to eyeball this. That looks pretty good. Cool. Okay, so now we have this little landscape of monkeys on tiled boxes. All right, so now let's set up a couple of cameras and I'll show you some animating tricks for the camera. So, I already started doing this with this camera group here, but I'm going to delete these and we'll do it again. So, right now we have the camera group here and I've got this background image from the last tutorial. So, I'm going to put my 3D cursor in the middle. I'm going to add a new camera. I'm going to call it Perspective Camera. Perspective Camera. And I'm going to hover over this area here and press Control numpad 0 so that my perspective camera view is brought up. If you don't have the numerical keyboard, you can just go View, Cameras, and if you have the camera selected, set active object as camera. I'll do the same thing. And I'm also going to, good, I've got my camera locked to the view, so I can just, you know, fly around and have my camera approximately in a good place. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add that extra object that the camera will point to, which will make animating our camera much easier. So Shift A, and I'm going to add an empty, and it's going to be a plane axis. Now that's come out a little bit big, so in its properties down here, I'm just going to set its size to 0.1. So now it's just a nice small set of axes. And if I go into the top view, I want to see what my colors are. Okay, I want to point it at this monkey here. So I'm just going to grab it and put it right between the eyes of that monkey. Okay, cool. So what I want is, I want to have my camera always pointing to this empty. And I'm going to call it perspective empty. Okay, so, and I'm just going to put both of these in this perspective camera group that I made before. If you don't have a group like this, with the camera and the empty selected, just press M and you can make a new collection and just call it whatever you want. I just do this so I can keep things organized. All right, so here's my camera, and if I want, at the moment, if I move my camera around, it's not pointing at the empty, it's just pointing wherever I've set it to. I'll right click to undo that. To point it to my empty, I need to add a constraint. So I go into the Constraints tab here, which is this little, it's like two things with a ring around it, which I guess is the constraint. And I'm going to add a track to constraint. And it's going to say target, you know, what are we tracking it to? And the reason I name these things is so I can now put in persp, and then I can go perspective empty and hit enter. But it might, that automatically might have worked, but it might not. So now if I press G for grab, all right, look, it's worked automatically. That's cool. So there are a bunch of settings here that it'll ask what axis you want to target this to, and sometimes you just have to play around to get it to do what you want. But this automatically said target to -Z, up is Y, and that's all working perfectly for us, because if I move the camera, it's always pointed to those monkeys. All right, now what I also said I wanted to do is I wanted to have this monkey be in focus and the other monkeys not in focus. So I'm going to add depth of field, but I'm going to put an object here for it to focus on. And I'm going to put the object right on the eye of the monkey. And you can kind of use any object for this. To me, a cube is just as easy. That cube is obviously too large, so I'm going to scale that by S.01. It's probably fine. Should be nice and small. There it is, and I'm going to call it perspective camera focus. And I'm also going to move it M to the perspective camera group. So now this group just has these things in it. And I've got my old focus thing here actually. I'll just delete that because we're not using it anymore. Okay, so if I get my perspective camera and I go into depth of field and focus on object, I'm going to put PERSP and I'll get my perspective camera focus object. So now if we zoom in, I'll go into top mode and I just grab it and bring it closer and maybe bring it down, GZ. We can see what our depth of field is like. And if you see the aperture here at the moment, it's 2.8, but if I make that, if I change that number, now we've got that cool effect where, you know, we're mimicking how a camera works. So if I put that at like 1, that's kind of nice, you know, it's got that like, it makes this monkey look a bit special and the others sort of look like they're in the background. I also want to hide this object, this cube, because it's just there to give a coordinate or a distance for the camera to focus on. We don't want to see it. So I'm going to untick the eye and untick the camera. If you don't have the eye and the camera here, you can get them by just clicking on the restriction toggles here and selecting the eye and the camera. They're the most common ones that I use all the time. I'm just going to save my file so I don't fall victim to a computer crash. All right, so let's just quickly do some animation on the camera. Let's get through this. All right, so I'm going to bring the camera back. Back. Actually, because what I wanted to do was the vertigo effect thing, didn't I? So the vertigo effect, as we mentioned in class, it's basically adjusting two properties. The focal length, which is, think of it like the zoom of the camera, and you can see that as the focal length changes, not only does the distance between the, the size of the monkey on the screen change, but the perspective starts to get really warped. Like if I make the focal length like 7 millimeters, we've got this crazy like fisheye perspective warping. And then if I make the focal length really, really big, if you look at the squares, there's almost no perspective now. And that's just something about how camera lenses work. And that's how people like Alfred Hitchcock, came up with this perspective effect. I think it was actually his camera operator who came up with it. And I'm not a great film scholar, so I don't know the camera operator's name. But feel free to Google it and put it in the comments of this video. Okay, anyhow, let's put this back to a more standard length of 50 millimeters. And what I want to do is maybe start with something large, like 100, and end up with something small, just for fun. So if I just grab this back, and I'm going to grab it up, what I want to do is kind of keep the same framing and just change the perspective. So I need to keyframe two things. The location of the camera, so I'm at frame 1, so I'm going to press I, and also the focal length. So I have to put a keyframe here as well, I. And now let's go to frame 50, let's make it kind of fast. Oh, let's be precise. 60, so that's like 2 seconds in real time. And then we are going to make this something small, like 20. And so you can see how now we're really out of view. I'll keyframe that 20, but that means we need to bring the camera much closer again. So I'm just going to grab it, bring it closer, and we're going to have to bring it down. I could probably do this more precisely, but I just kind of want to get it close enough. I think I want to be even closer. Yeah, something more like that. So yeah, I had to bring that camera down a fair bit to get this to work. That seems a bit better. Now if I just bring it up a bit, I think we're still a little bit too close now. Okay, so now I'm just going to keyframe that location. So now if you look at our dope sheet graph editor down here, we've got keyframed on the focal length of the camera and its location. And yeah, it's okay, it's not great. The framing on that last keyframe could be better. So basically we want to keep, so see in the first one we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 and then our group in the middle, and then at the end I think I've just like mucked up that position a little bit. Can I fix it? We'll go back like that, and actually it's probably, think about this for a second, because what's happening is our field of view is getting wider, so we will always see a lot more in that final view. And let's make it a little more extreme too. Instead of going to 20, let's go to something crazy like 10. So this might look super weird, but let's just try it out. Okay. So now my camera is really almost on top of that monkey. Yeah, let's try like this. This might look cool. I'm going to keyframe that now. So now, yeah, that's cool. I'm kind of happy with that. It looks like the monkey is staying sort of in the same place, but we've got this crazy warping. So now if I just press play there, we've got that vertigo effect. That's cool. And you know, if you wanted to use an effect like this, you can also think about which way you want it to look. Like if I scroll backwards, it's got a different sort of emotional feeling to it. Like scrolling backwards, it's like all of a sudden the world is coming towards you, where here it's like you're losing the world and the world is drawing away from you. So they've got these different sort of, I don't know, one is like you're coming into reality, the other one is like you're going crazy. So, you know, if you want to use this effect, just see which direction is interesting. Okay, so that's how we keyframe the vertigo effect. It's by moving the location and the focal length of the camera. So now I'm just going to do some camera panning, and I'm going to keyframe my focal length back up to something more normal, like 50. So let's just go to frame 100, and I'm going to put my focal length at 50, and I'm just going to move my camera away a bit to something that looks nice. And I have no idea what this transition will look like. I'm really just kind of playing around. So now I'll keyframe that location and make sure that's keyframed. So now what happens if I play that? Vertigo Effect. I think we should have had some more time there. All right, so if we want more time, because it went back to the normal, either more time or less time actually. So we get Vertigo Effect, zoom, and then we kind of bounce back. I think we should bounce back actually faster. That might even be cool. So let's just go to the dope sheet. I'll show you the convenience of the dope sheet. Dope sheet here, the keyframes have just become like these yellow dots. So I can just G and X that and move it further in. So I'm going to move that to like 75. So now if we go play, zoom, straight back. I'm okay with that. That looks fun. And now, leaving the camera, the perspective empty, like the aim where it is, I'm just gonna like drag my camera around and put some keyframes in different places. When you're doing proper timing, you'd probably want to do something a little bit more precise, but this is just to remind you basically of how this whole system works with having the camera parented to an aiming object, so so you can always have it pointing to where you want. So I'm just basically slowly bringing it around and bringing it quite close to my monkey, and then I might bring it down. So basically every time I make another change, I'm moving myself along the timeline before I add in another keyframe. I'm going to finish with a close-up. Now, obviously, you know, even if you do it in this quick and dirty way, you can always move the keyframes around and change the timing. So, you know, my lack of precision here could be corrected. Okay, so yeah, some of that spinning, the timing's terrible. Like I might space these out a bit. And remember, your playback is not completely real time. If you want real-time playback, actually, we could set the playback to frame dropping. So that should mean it's playing at the correct speed, and if it can't give you real-time playback fast enough, it'll just drop some frames. So now if I press play, what do we get? Okay. There's our animation. Okay. All right, so that'll do for that exercise. Basically, I'm just reminding you how to set up the camera, the aim, the focal length, and the focal length object, and how to do some looped animations like these twinkling lights. The other thing I said I was going to show you was if we go back to the syllabus, this thing here, isometric and axonometric space. We're going to have a whole lecture on that, but I want to show you now just what that means in Blender. It's just a different type of camera, but mathematically it's super interesting. All right, so we've got our perspective camera group, and I'm going to hide that whole group, and I'm going to add in a new camera. Shift A, camera, and it's gone somewhere. It's probably where my 3D cursor was. Okay, so now it's just pointing down to nowhere. So I'll rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees, grab it on the y-axis, and there it is. So now I'm going to press Control numpad 0 to frame it there. So now we can see where our camera is. Now, this is a perspective camera. See how we have a vanishing point? All of these parallel lines are pointing to a vanishing point. And the reason that they're pointing to a single vanishing point is just because of the way we're looking. Like if I rotated this camera, we would have a 2-point perspective situation. But okay, I want to leave it there. I'll show you why. We're going to change this camera from being a perspective camera, so I'm in the camera tab here, into an orthographic camera. And immediately, we've lost the perspective. All of these have they've gone two-dimensional. But that two-dimensionality gives us this sort of axonometric view, which is we can still have a three-dimensional projection, it's just that we don't have a vanishing point anymore. And if I make sure that I'm locked on the camera to view, and now I rotate, it looks super cool. But I want to show you slowly exactly what it's doing. So I'll just, oops, put it back to orthographic. So if I grab on the Z up and down, the cool thing here is that we're not getting any change in perspective. But if I'm here and I rotate it on the x-axis, Rx, look at these amazing effects you get. Because now that we don't have perspective, we've got this really strange non-perspectival spatial overlapping. All these lines are actually still completely vertical, and we get these bizarre but quite beautiful patterns. Now, if I rotate the camera on the z-axis, we start getting something closer to like an isometric type of view. So if I rotate it away a little bit, then go into top mode and just grab it and put it over here, we can see we've got this quite beautiful, like almost robotic sort of repetition. And again, we can do all the same stuff we were doing before. I can add in an empty and make sure that this camera is always pointing to the empty by adding the track 2 constraint. And oh, I didn't name my empty, that was stupid. I'll call it, I didn't name my camera either, so I'll call it Orthographic Aim, and this camera is orthographic camera. All right, and I'm going to put them both in the orthographic camera group, which probably already has some cameras in it, so I'll delete those, and I'll put both of these in the M for move orthographic camera group, so it's all organized again. Okay, now did our track 2 constraint work? No, because we haven't set the target. So I will just put in ortho and grab the aim. Now if I press G for grab, yes, it worked. Okay. So using the orthographic camera, we get a totally different type of view. You know, it's this, to me, it's very beautiful. It's got like a sort of, it's like how a computer might see. It's very architectural. The one thing you'll notice though is that there's no zoom. Nothing's getting bigger and smaller. That basically is because there's no perspective. As an orthographic camera moves further and away from something, it never changes scale. I mean, the scale is staying exactly the same. So I'll show, but if we want to change the scale, we have to change what's called the orthographic scale of the camera, which we can keyframe as well. So here you can see that the size or scale of the camera is changing, and we can kind of zoom in with that orthographic view using the orthographic scale. So for now, just have a play with it. And for your buildings, trust me, you'll be able to make some really quite beautiful sort of utopian or architectural views with your orthographic camera. So it's a great thing to know about, to play around with. And I think that's getting to the end of the things I wanted to show you in the tutorial. Now, what I wanted to remind you, I'm just going to go back into modeling mode. I'm just going to hide these groups that we were making, and I want to go back to what you will be working on, which is your buildings. And so, okay, I've just shown you all these things with like animating some lights, animating cameras, and for your animation, I want you to just play around with your buildings. You know, go into your modifiers, and you can, you know, you could animate all of these counts. You could have your buildings getting taller and shorter. You know, all of these boxes, if you just press I, you can put a keyframe in the array modifier. If you want to get rid of the keyframe here, just right click and hit clear keyframes. So you can animate any property of your array. You could also animate the relative offset of the array. So, you know, the buildings could start flying up into the sky. I'll turn that back to 1. You could animate the empties, you know, the things that we used for the offset of the building. If I grab this on the Y, you know, I can have the buildings move apart like this. You know, there's really no limit to what type of things you can animate, because we've set up the scene in a very kind of flexible way by using arrays. And not only does that make it easier for us to 3D model, but for animation, it allows some really interesting possibilities. Like if I scale these even, you know, if I scale my building monomer, even then I get some great weird stuff. So what I'd like you to do for this animation is think, you know, not only just creating complete insanity, but maybe you can even tell a story. Like maybe just using the buildings themselves and the way the camera looks at them, maybe the way that the buildings come together over time or the way that they multiply. You can start to just tell a purely spatial story. And that's kind of what I'd like you to try for exercise 2. And I hope that this video tutorial gave you some new techniques, reminded you of how to use the cameras, and if you want to remember how to export the frame sequence, I think it's one of the first or second tutorials I made that does that. Yeah, I think that's about it. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of little problems that we will encounter along the way that either you will forget where the solution was in one of my videos, or maybe there are some problems that I haven't thought of. So of course we have class time and the Discord to discuss these problems. But yeah, so that's the tutorial for this week. I hope it gave you some interesting ideas, and I really look forward to seeing this stuff that you're going to make for exercise 2. And if you're not sure of what you should be making, just go back into the Google Drive or the Moodle and check the syllabus. All right, thanks everyone, and have a good day, night, or week. All right, bye-bye.